Some people walk through Christmas lights with their hearts already full. Others walk through them trying not to fall apart. That night, in the middle of a snowy city park, a grown man sat on a bench beside a glowing Christmas tree and quietly cried where he thought no one would see him. His suit was expensive, his watch was gold, but his shoulders shook like a lost child's. And then, from behind the tree, came a tiny voice that cut right through the cold. "Don't cry, mister. You can share my mom today, if you want. If you stay with me until the end of this story, you'll see how that one sentence from a little boy with red mittens and a runny nose did something no money, no doctor, and no therapist had been able to do for years. It didn't just change a stranger's night, it changed his entire life." Daniel Hayes had never imagined he'd turn into the man crying in public. He used to be the strong one, the one people came to for advice, the one who paid everyone's salary and signed big checks like it was nothing. He owned a small construction company that had slowly grown into a regional firm. People in town knew his logo, his trucks, his solid handshake, but that was before the accident. Before the drunk driver, before he watched his wife's casket lower into frozen ground 4 days after Christmas. That had been 3 years ago. Since then, Christmas came around every year like a cruel reminder. Everywhere he looked, there were families taking pictures, couples holding hands, children squealing with excitement, everywhere except in his apartment. His daughter, Emily, was away at college now. She called, she texted, she loved him, but she had her own life, her own friends, her own healing to do. He didn't want to pull her back into his grief, so he pretended he was fine. The last straw came that afternoon. He'd stayed late at the office, going over numbers that didn't want to behave. The economy was shaky, projects were delayed, and for the first time in years, he had to consider layoffs in January. He knew every worker by name. He knew who had a kid in the hospital, who was paying off a truck, who was raising grandkids on their own. The idea of firing anyone made him sick. On his desk, next to the spreadsheet, sat a little snow globe his wife had bought years ago. Inside it, a tiny boy and his mother stood under a Christmas tree, holding hands. When you shook it, soft flakes whirled around them like magic. He'd picked it up, turned it over, and read the faded golden letters at the bottom. No one should stand in the snow alone. Something in him snapped. He slipped on his coat, walked out of the office, and just kept walking. He didn't tell his assistant where he was going. He didn't answer his phone. His feet carried him toward Riverside Park, the place his wife had loved. The park with the big city Christmas tree that everyone visited for photos. By the time he got there, the early winter darkness had already swallowed the sky. Snowfall drifted down like tiny feathers. The giant tree blazed with warm yellow lights, ornaments glinting with reds and golds. Couples took selfies. Kids ran circles around parents. Somewhere, faintly, a bell ringer from a charity pot chimed a tired rhythm. And just to the side of all that joy, Daniel found an empty bench. He sat. He tried to swallow the lump in his throat. He failed. He thought about his wife's laugh, the way she'd rubbed his shoulder when he was stressed, how she'd drag him out to look at Christmas lights even when he grumbled about work. He thought about the last Christmas they'd had together, how he'd promised, "Next year I'll take more time off." There had been no next year. His chest clenched. The weight of the upcoming layoffs, the quiet apartment, the empty seat at the table, it all piled up at once. Before he knew it, tears were sliding down his cheeks, hot against the cold air. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees, one hand covering his face. That's when he heard the little boots crunching in the snow. "Mom, wait, that Mr. Sad." The tiny voice was close now, somewhere just to his left. Daniel sniffed, wiped at his face quickly, and tried to pull himself together. He didn't want to scare any kids. He straightened his shoulders, forced his features into something neutral, and turned. A little boy, maybe 4 or 5, stood a few feet away. He wore a red puffy jacket zipped up to his chin, blue jeans tucked into clunky snow boots, and a knitted hat with a pom-pom that kept sliding over one eyebrow. His cheeks were red from the cold, nose shiny, mittens oversized. In his hand, he held a small brown paper bag decorated with a shaky drawing of a Christmas tree. Behind him stood a woman in her early 30s, her coat open just enough to show a simple sweater dress. Her hair was pulled back in a loose bun, a bit frizzy from the snow. She looked like she had rushed from work, but still somehow managed to smile with her whole face. She caught Daniel's eye and offered an embarrassed, apologetic look, as if to say, "I'm sorry my kid stared at you crying." "Noah," she whispered gently. "Come on, honey, don't bother the man." But Noah didn't move. He studied Daniel with the serious intensity only small children and old men seem to have. Then he took a step closer. "Don't cry, mister," Noah said softly. "You can share my mom today if you want." It was such an innocent, absurdly kind sentence that Daniel almost forgot to breathe. The woman's eyes widened. "Noah," she hissed, mortified, taking his shoulder. "That's not—" "I'm so sorry, sir. He's just very friendly." Daniel let out a shaky laugh that startled him. "It's all right," he croaked. His voice sounded rough, like he hadn't used it in hours. "I'm just a little tired, that's all." "You're sad," Noah corrected in that brutally honest way kids have. "My teacher says when people cry, they're sad. Mom makes hot chocolate when I'm sad. Maybe you need hot chocolate." The woman looked like she wanted the ground to open up and swallow her. "Noah, honey, we don't—" "Actually," Daniel interrupted quietly, surprising himself. "Your teacher sounds very wise." He wiped his face again, trying to regain some dignity. "And your mum seems like she raises a very kind boy." Noah beamed. "She's the best mum in the world. She fixes everything. She even fixed my bear's arm with tape." He held up the paper bag. "We're going to see the big tree. Mom says we can't buy toys this year, but we can buy memories." He pronounced memories like it had too many syllables. Daniel felt something twist in his chest. The boy's honesty, the way he spoke about not buying toys as if it was just a fact, not a complaint. It cut straight through Daniel's fog. The woman gave an awkward laugh. "Okay, philosopher, that's enough." She turned to Daniel. "I'm really sorry. We should let you have some privacy." Before Daniel could respond, Noah piped up again. "But Mom, you said nobody should be alone at Christmas. That's what Grandpa used to say." Silence wrapped around them, thicker than the snow. The woman's eyes glistened. For a second, Daniel saw something in her expression, a flicker of grief, maybe, or an old wound. "You're right," she whispered to her son. Then she looked back at Daniel and shrugged, a soft, rueful gesture. "We were just going to walk around the tree and then get some cocoa from the cart over there." She pointed to a small stand with steam pouring from its roof. "If you'd like to join us, we'd be happy to share our table." No pressure. It was such a simple offer, so normal, so small, and yet, to Daniel, sitting on that lonely bench, it felt like someone had thrown him a lifeline in the dark. He cleared his throat. I don't want to intrude." "You're not intruding," Noah said firmly, reaching out his mittened hand. "You're invited." A few minutes later, Daniel found himself walking beside them. The giant tree towered above, branches sagging under the weight of ornaments and snow. Noah raced ahead, circling the tree, counting the big red balls out loud. The woman walked slower, matching Daniel's pace. "I'm Grace, by the way," she said, "and you've already met Noah. He doesn't do stranger danger very well. I noticed," Daniel replied, a small smile tugging at his lips. "I'm Daniel." "Nice to meet you. Daniel who sits on park benches crying?" She said it gently, with no mockery, just a hint of teasing that made it easier to breathe. He winced. "That obvious, huh? Only to little boys who think they're superheroes." They reached the cocoa cart, and Grace pulled out a worn wallet. Daniel instinctively reached for his own. "Please," he said quickly, "let me get this. It's the least I can do for crashing your evening." Grace hesitated, then nodded. "All right, but only if you join us. No disappearing after paying like some mysterious movie character." They found a small table under a string of lights. The vendor handed them 3 steaming cups topped with marshmallows. Noah immediately got whipped cream on his nose and didn't seem to care. "So," Grace asked after a moment, blowing on her drink, "do you always cry in parks? Or is tonight special?" Daniel almost choked on his cocoa. Her bluntness was disarming, but her eyes were kind. No judgment, just curiosity. "Tonight's special," he admitted. She nodded slowly. "Anniversary of something." He blinked. "How'd you guess?" "Grief leaves a certain look," she said softly. "I recognize it. Today's the 5th Christmas Eve since my dad passed. He used to bring me here when I was little. Now I bring Noah, so the tradition doesn't die." "I'm sorry," Daniel said quietly. "Me too," she gave a small smile. "But I've learned something. It hurts less when you don't sit alone with it." He stared at her, then looked down at the swirling marshmallows in his cup, the bench, the tears, the snow globe. It all pressed against his ribs. 3 years ago, he began slowly. "My wife died. Car accident. A drunk driver ran a light. We were supposed to go to her parents' house for a belated Christmas dinner. She never made it." His voice cracked on the last word. Grace's eyes softened. "Daniel, I'm so sorry. Every year since, I tell myself it'll be easier," he continued. "But then December hits, and it's like someone presses replay on the worst day of my life." He gave a humorless laugh. "I came out here thinking maybe I could just watch other people be happy and feel, I don't know, less broken somehow. Instead, I ended up sobbing like a teenager." "I've seen teenagers," Grace said gently. "Most of them don't cry. They just scroll." She tilted her head. "Crying doesn't mean you're weak. It means you love deeply." Noah, who had been tilting his cup dangerously, suddenly looked up. "My teacher says crying is like your heart cleaning itself," he announced, "so it doesn't get moldy." Grace snorted. "He very happily repeats everything his teacher says." "Moldy hearts would be bad," Daniel agreed, managing a real smile. For the next 20 minutes, they simply talked. Daniel learned that Grace was a nurse's aide at the local hospital, working double shifts to make ends meet. Noah's father wasn't in the picture. He had left when Noah was a baby, deciding family life was too heavy. Since then, it had been just the 2 of them. They didn't have much, Grace admitted, but they had enough. Enough love, enough laughter, enough hope. "And enough hot chocolate," Noah added, licking foam off his lip. "And enough hot chocolate," Grace echoed. At one point, Noah climbed off his chair and tugged on Daniel's sleeve. "Mr. Daniel, do you have kids?" Daniel nodded. "I have one daughter, Emily. She's in college now." "Do you miss her?" he asked. "Every day. Can she come drink hot chocolate with us too?" Daniel swallowed. "She's far away right now, but maybe someday. Okay. Noah seemed satisfied with that. Then he did something that nearly undid Daniel all over again. He scooted his chair closer, pressed his small shoulder against Daniel's arm, and leaned there as comfortably as if he'd known him all his life. "My mum says God sends people to us," Noah said sleepily, "when we're sad, so we don't have to be sad alone." Grace blinked quickly, looking away as if the lights had suddenly become too bright. Daniel stared at the little boy. He felt the warmth of that small body through both their coats. He felt the simple trust of that gesture. And for the first time in a very long time, the crushing emptiness in his chest shifted, not gone, but moved aside just enough to let something else in. "I think your mom is right," Daniel whispered. They might have parted ways that night and never seen each other again. That's the way these stories usually go, isn't it? A moment of kindness, a shared drink, a warm memory. Each person walks away changed, but their lives never cross again. But that's not what happened. Because life, especially around Christmas, has a strange way of weaving people together when they need it most. 2 mornings later, Daniel stood in the conference room on the top floor of his office building, staring at a row of faces around the table. Department managers, project leads, people who were waiting for his decision. "We can't keep all the staff at the current workload," his finance director was saying. "If we don't reduce expenses, we'll be in serious trouble by spring. The easiest way is to cut the maintenance and cleaning contracts, outsource to a cheaper company. We save nearly $300,000 a year." On the screen at the end of the table, a slideshow displayed graphs, numbers, Ds, and names of the cleaning staff whose jobs would disappear. They were contract workers, technically, employed through a third-party service. Invisible people, mostly. People who came in at night when the office was empty. People Daniel had never bothered to meet. He looked at the columns of numbers, the red negative signs. Logic said one thing. His chest said another. No one should stand in the snow alone. Grace's words, Noah's mitten in his hand, the warmth of that small shoulder against his arm, they floated through his mind. "Who owns the cleaning company?" Daniel asked suddenly. There was a pause. Some local services," the finance director replied. "Mostly small outfits. We've got a list." "Bring me the list." An hour later, Daniel sat in his office, scanning the names of various cleaning and maintenance services his company used for different properties. One name jumped out at him, Bright Star Janitorial, owner Grace Miller. He stared. Miller. He remembered the way she'd introduced herself. "I'm Grace. This is Noah." He looked again at the address. A small office space in one of the commercial buildings Daniel's company owned on the other side of town. A building that was, according to the notes, under review for sale or repurposing. "Get me the Bright Star contract," he told his assistant, "and call the owner. I'd like to meet." The next afternoon, Grace sat in the lobby of Hayes Construction, twisting her gloves in her hands. She had almost cancelled. The email had seemed too official, too intimidating. "Dear Mrs. Miller, this is Daniel Hayes's office. Mr. Hayes would like to meet with you tomorrow at 3 p.m. regarding your cleaning contract. Please confirm availability." Her first thought had been, we're getting dropped. It was happening everywhere. Big companies cutting little ones. She'd already lost 2 small contracts this year. If she lost this one, their biggest, she didn't know how she'd pay rent by March. She wore her only good outfit, a black skirt, a white blouse, and the same grey coat she'd worn at the park. Her hair was pulled back neatly. She'd left Noah with her elderly neighbor, a sweet woman who accepted payment in homemade cookies and Noah's drawings. "Miss Miller," the receptionist's voice pulled her back to the present. "Mr. Hayes will see you now. Top floor, last door on the right." Grace stood on legs that felt strangely wobbly. She rode the elevator up, watching the numbers climb, trying not to imagine boxes, eviction notices, and foreclosure letters. The office at the end of the corridor had a simple silver plaque, "Daniel Hayes, CEO." She took a breath, knocked, and stepped inside when she heard a muffled, "Come in!" Daniel rose from behind his desk. For a moment, both of them simply stared. "You're the Cocoa Man," Noah had called him, Grace remembered. "You're the hot chocolate nurse," Daniel almost said out loud. Instead, they both blurted, "You?" Then they laughed, nervous, startled, but real. I didn't realize," Daniel said, coming around the desk. "When I saw the name on the contract, I thought there was no way it could be the same Grace." Grace found her voice. "And I didn't realize you were this Daniel." She gestured vaguely at the office around them. "I hope this isn't a bad surprise," he said carefully. "Please have a seat." She sat on the edge of the chair, back straight. "If you've called me in to end the contract, you can just say it, Mr. Hayes. I appreciate you giving me the courtesy of a face-to-face, but that's not why you're here," he interrupted. She blinked. "It's not." "No." He hesitated, searching for the right words. "The truth is, financially, cutting cleaning services would make sense on paper. It was presented as the easiest place to save money. But I realized something." "What's that?" "I've spent years walking past invisible people," he said slowly. "People who empty trash cans, mop floors, wipe down desks. People who, if they stopped showing up, we'd all notice. But when they're here, no one even looks them in the eye." Grace swallowed. She knew that feeling all too well. "I don't want to be that kind of company," Daniel continued, "or that kind of man." He slid a folder across the desk toward her. "So instead of cutting Bright Star, I'd like to extend your contract for 3 years with a rate increase." Grace's mouth fell open. "A rate? But why?" The word escaped before she could stop it. Daniel smiled faintly. "Because someone reminded me recently that no one should be alone at Christmas. Not a CEO trying to save his company. Not a janitor mopping floors at midnight. Not a little boy whose dad walked away. We're all carrying something." Grace blinked hard. "Daniel, I don't know what to say." "Say you'll accept," he suggested gently. "And that you'll tell Noah his sharing his mom idea worked better than he knew." A laugh burst out of her, half choked by tears. "He's going to love that." They went over the details. The new contract. An offer for Grace to participate in a small business advisory council Daniel was forming. He wanted to create a platform where small service providers could give feedback rather than just being numbers on a spreadsheet. When the business part was done, there was a moment of silence. "Can I ask you something?" Grace said finally. "Of course." "That night in the park, what made you accept Noah's invitation?" She looked at him curiously. "Most men would have smiled politely and walked away." Daniel thought for a long moment. "Truth," he said. "I think I was tired of pretending I was fine, and he was the first person who didn't tiptoe around me or try to fix me. He just offered what he had, a mom, hot chocolate, company. It felt honest." Grace's eyes softened. "He does that. He gives away what little he has, like it's endless." "Maybe it is," Daniel murmured. She stood, smoothing her skirt. "Thank you, Daniel, truly. You didn't have to do this." "Actually, I did," he replied, "for my own soul." They walked to the door together. Just before she left, Daniel cleared his throat. "Grace?" "Yes." "Would you and Noah Maybe like to come over for dinner sometime. I make a pretty decent lasagna. My daughter will be home from college next week, and it would be nice to have more than 2 people at the table for once. Grace hesitated. Are you sure? We don't want to intrude. You're not intruding, he said, echoing his own words from the park. You're invited. The following Friday, Daniel stood in his kitchen wearing an apron his daughter had bought as a joke. It said, "Kiss the cook," in big red letters. Emily, home for winter break, stirred a pot of sauce on the stove. "Okay," she said, glancing at him over her shoulder. "Let me get this straight. You cried under a Christmas tree, got adopted for the evening by a random little boy and his mom, and now you've renewed her business contract and invited them to dinner. When you say it like that, it sounds unusual," Daniel admitted. "It sounds like you're finally making friends again," Emily replied. She reached out and squeezed his arm. "Mom would like that." His throat tightened. "You think so?" "I know so." The doorbell rang. Noah barreled into the apartment 5 minutes later like a tiny snowstorm, thrusting a folded piece of paper into Daniel's hands. "I made you something." Daniel unfolded it. Crayon lines showed 3 stick figures holding hands under a Christmas tree. 1 tall man, 1 woman with long hair, 1 small boy. Above them, shaky letters spelled out, "No one should be sad at Christmas." He swallowed hard. "This is beautiful, Noah. Thank you." Grace stepped inside, cheeks flushed from the cold. She held a casserole dish covered in foil. "I brought dessert," she said. "It's not fancy, just my grandma's apple crisp." "It smells amazing," Emily said, appearing from the kitchen. "Hi, you must be Grace. I'm Emily." Within an hour, the apartment was filled with more noise and laughter than it had heard in years. They told stories about Emily's chaotic dorm life, about Noah's preschool adventures, about Grace's patients who flirted with every nurse over 60. They teased Daniel about his dramatic apron. Noah declared that Daniel's lasagna was almost as good as Mom's. At one point, when everyone was full and sleepy, Noah climbed onto the couch next to Daniel and rested his head against his arm again. "Are you still sad, Mr. Daniel?" he asked quietly. Daniel thought about it. "Yes," he answered honestly. "Sometimes I still miss my wife. That part doesn't go away." "But are you sad alone?" Noah pressed. Daniel looked at Emily, laughing with Grace across the room. He thought about the new contract saved, the small business council, the drawings on his fridge. He thought about the way Grace had said, "It hurts less when you don't sit alone with it." "No," he said slowly. "Tonight I'm not sad alone." Noah nodded, satisfied. "Good. Then my plan worked." "What plan?" "I told God you needed a mom," Noah whispered conspiratorially. "So he sent you mine to borrow, but you can't keep her forever, okay? She's still my mom." Daniel laughed, the sound surprising him with how light it felt. "Deal. I'll just borrow both of you from time to time, and you can borrow us too, whenever you need." "Like a family library," Noah said sleepily. "We share people." "Something like that," Daniel agreed. Months passed. Winter melted into spring. Snow gave way to rain, then sunshine. The economy slowly steadied. Daniel's company adjusted, not by cutting invisible workers, but by tightening unnecessary luxuries at the top. Executives flew coach instead of first class. The Christmas party became a volunteer day at a shelter. Grace's business grew. With the stability of the extended contract and Daniel's referrals, she hired 2 more workers. She replaced her old, constantly breaking vacuum with a new one that didn't smell like burnt toast. She even managed to take Noah to a weekend cabin by a lake. "Our first real vacation," she told Daniel proudly. Emily returned to college but visited more often. Drawn by the newfound warmth at home, she and Grace became friends. Sometimes they swapped recipes. Sometimes they just sat on the couch, sharing stories of the woman who had connected them without ever knowing, Daniel's late wife. Every December, the four of them went back to Riverside Park together. They stood under the big Christmas tree. They took a photo every year in the same spot. Daniel, Emily, Grace, and Noah. You could see the changes if you lined them up. Noah growing taller, Emily's hairstyles changing. Daniel's smile getting a little less haunted each time. On the third year, as snow fell in lazy circles around them, Grace slipped her arm through Daniel's. "Do you remember that first night?" she asked. "How could I forget?" he replied. "I was so embarrassed. I thought Noah was being rude, offering to share me. I thought I'd die of shame, being caught crying by a 5-year-old, Daniel answered. They both laughed softly. "And yet," Grace said, "here we are. Maybe he saw something we didn't. Maybe he did," Daniel agreed. Noah, now taller and missing a front tooth, looked up at them. "Are you two being mushy again?" "Probably," Emily said, rolling her eyes affectionately. "It happens at Christmas." Noah grabbed Daniel's hand with one mitten and Grace's with the other. "Good," he declared, "because my teacher says families aren't just who you're born with. They're who stands with you in the snow." Daniel's throat tightened. He looked around, the lights, the people, the snow, the boy who had offered his mom, the woman who'd shared her grief and her courage, his daughter whose laughter sounded more like her mother's every year. He thought about that first night on the bench when he'd felt like life was over, and he realized something simple, something profound. His wife's chapter in his life had ended, but the story hadn't. It had just changed titles. If this story touched your heart, I'd like to ask you something. Is there someone in your life who might be sitting on a bench right now? Maybe not in a park, but in their living room, in a hospital room, in a small empty kitchen, trying not to cry where anyone can see them. Maybe tonight you can be their Noah. You don't need perfect words. You don't need money or a big gesture. Sometimes, all you have to offer is exactly what that little boy offered: a warm drink, a listening ear, a small, brave sentence that says, "You don't have to be sad alone." If you'd like to hear more stories like this, stories of kindness, second chances, and the quiet miracles that happen when ordinary people care, make sure you subscribe, leave a like, and share this video with someone who needs hope today. And down in the comments, tell us, have you ever been borrowed by someone who needed family for a moment? Or have you ever borrowed someone yourself? Your story might be exactly what someone else needs to keep going.